Welcome back for episode 13 of the Astronomical Apocrypha, the Seleukid Empire narrative Let's Play for Rome 2 with Divide et Impera. Last time, Antiochos Soter found himself on the verge of realizing his father's ambition to regain control of the Macedonian homeland, when a message from Sardis changed his world dramatically. After quickly dispatching the garrison at Philippopolis and leaving the city under the supervision of Antigonos Doson, Antiochos Soter returned to Antioch to lay his wife's body to rest. Meanwhile, his son Antiochos Theos narrowly captured the port city of Pella with the help of Cordylion. Although the naval assault did not go as planned, the small bay becoming clogged with ships as the path into the harbor district was blocked by the careless landing protocols of a few Rhodian slinger crews. Freed of his father's oversight, Theos then plunged into war with the neighboring Illyrians, dragging the reluctant but obedient Antigonos Doson with him. Diogenes, deaf to the outcry among his soldiers, continued a brutal forced march through the Arabian desert, after briefly turning back to arrange a rendezvous with Euclid's Wisdom of the Goose. The two generals tackled the Himyar military with relative ease, but found the Saba blocking the road south a much more significant challenge. Antiochos Soter, now remarried to a much crueler woman from Macedon, turns his anguish to violence, joining Eualcidas in Armenia to strike the first blow against the kings of the Black Sea, Bosphorus.
I'm no mollycoddle, Diogenes, but you must let the men rest. They're weak and tired, and many of their comrades have died. Nonsense. Well, you are a bit of a mollycoddle, Euclid, but I don't mean to indulge my men, even at times like this. If it hasn't been said already, I'm saying it now. Whatever does not kill us makes us stronger. Well, it is killing us, and no one is getting stronger. I'm the representative of the House of Seleukos here, and I say we stop. And I'm the highest ranking commander, and I say we don't. I'm sure there will be food and water in Eudaimon. To stop short of our salvation is madness. Even so, should I fall ill or rendered incapable of carrying on, I ask that you look after the Golden Fleece in my absence. I, of course, shall reciprocate, and agree to look after your goose if you fall. The goose doesn't like you, and I don't like you either. Honesty is a rare virtue, Euclid. I shall send Argyrios instead. I will be busy with my own men anyway.
Euclid and Diogenes are nearing the Himyar capital, but are still a turn or two away. Thankfully, we should be in range before the scorching summer sun arrives again. Far away in Pannonia, Eurydice attempts arson against the Brusii settlement at Segestica, but fails in her effort while Antiochos Theos moves up a short distance to the other side of Singidon. We're now dealing with imperial unrest in multiple locations, including Macedon, Bithynia, and Ethiopia, where the populaces are unhappy, troubled, and outraged respectively. Fortunately, we've started to turn the situation around in Ethiopia, where the patrolling servants of Charon and the new Greek temple are keeping the unrest in check. Euclid and Diogenes march a bit closer to Eudaimon this turn, still out of range for an assault on the city. I merge a couple of units in the Wisdom of the Goose and add the available mercenary spears to keep the army strength up. We learn that the Ardii, the least uncooperative of the Illyrian tribes, is no longer available for us to trade with. I also get a mission to capture Korchak, which after some investigating appears to be the name for the local region around Tushpa, which is currently held by Bosphorus. I move Eualcidas in that direction in the hopes that he will be able to capitalize on this mission next turn. Antiochos Soter departs from Trapezos to arrive at the outskirts of Armavir, or Hake being the lesser-known name of the surrounding region in Armenia, as seen on the tooltip. With Antiochos and Eualcidas lined up to continue their aggressive push into the Bosphoron kingdom, Euclid and Diogenes have finally reached Eudaimon, and I'm relieved to find that not only can they participate together in the attack this turn, but also that we have a strong advantage on the balance bar in spite of the excessive desert attrition we've suffered for the past year. Though I would generally consider 30% losses a bit high, I'm willing to accept that number under the present circumstances, and besides, Diogenes doesn't count losses from auto-resolves either. I'm a little bit unhappy that even with the region changing hands we're still suffering attrition, but at this point I chalk it up to another turn of summer attrition. I eliminate as many mercenaries as I can to reduce our expenses and start recruiting some regular spears to replace them. Having finished animal husbandry, we have to pick another technology to research. And although I'll be after land reclamation before long on the way to perennial irrigation, which unlocks Tier 4 farms, I'm going to switch trees yet again to philosophy to get legal institutions that gives us some small but very handy faction-wide bonuses to tax rate, public order, and a reduction in empire maintenance. Antiochos Theos marches from Cordylion-held Pannonia Inferior into hostile Brusii territory in Pannonia Superior, although he doesn't quite have the range to strike at his enemies yet. Eurydice tries to do her part, again trying arson against Segestica, but this time being wounded in the attempt. Slightly to the south in Illyria and western Macedonia, I now see why I've lost the Ardii as a trade partner. They've been uprooted from their lands by the Daorsi. I suppose this is just as well, since this will give Antiochos Theos another excuse, if he needed any, to continue making war on the barbarians. During the end-turn phase, a huge number of Arche-Bosphorus forces are seen moving south through Ecbatana, just a couple of regions south from Eualcidas, where, although it's not shown explicitly, I get a glimpse of Tushpa having been taken by Hyastan. The Daorsi are then seen very presumptively trespassing into Macedonia to destroy the Illyrians sheltering there. In the autumn of 248 BC, we're greeted by a very unwelcome turn of events that is the beginning of an unwelcome trend. With the supply situation not improving in Arabia, the beaten, wounded, starving, and exhausted forces of the Wisdom of the Goose and the Golden Fleece are under continual attrition, and now Euclid himself is on death's door from attrition. We also learn that Cordylion, though militarily idle, is never idle when it comes to politics, and he's made a bid to gain Eualcidas' support for the opposing faction. I could pay to avoid this happening, but I have other problems right now, so I'll let it go. The attrition in Arabia also forces a somewhat bizarre and recurring practice of the officers of each army switching roles, and this time it's Agirios' turn, as he takes command of the Wisdom of the Goose in Euclid's stead. I start converting the buildings in Eudaimon to provide more food and to get the region's supplies replenished, although it's going to take several turns. Agirios leads his temporary charges to destroy what's left of the local Himyar resistance. I would just as soon take Tushpa from Hyastan as I would from Arche-Bosphorus, but I only recently ended my alliance with them. We have to allow some time to pass if our diplomatic status is ever to recover. Meanwhile, Antiochos Soter moves up to besiege Armavir, putting his men to work on the siege works. Antiochos Theos too has to look elsewhere for a target, since the Scordisi have beaten us to Segestica and claimed it for themselves, so he heads back to Pannonia Inferior. Next turn, more of the same in Arabia, the cooler weather being of no help given the ongoing lack of supplies. This time it's Diogenes who is temporarily lost to the attrition as Euclid returns. Since the game makes me pick a replacement from the pool rather than shuffling between two physically adjacent armies, I have to put Euclid in charge of the Golden Fleece while Agirios maintains the command of the Wisdom of the Goose. With Antiochos Soter maintaining his siege of Armavir, Eualcidas, still a loyal Seleukid in spite of his recent change of family affiliation, moves up en route to the city. Although we're once again suffering worse attrition than the defenders, I want to hold off one more turn before we launch the assault. I make a few minor modifications to the military infrastructure in Armenia and Bithynia, but the bulk of our wealth goes to the Tier 3 settlement upgrade at Philippopolis. During the end-turn phase, we're offered a truce by the Saba, and although I don't particularly trust them, under the circumstances I'd welcome the opportunity to return my armies to the well-supplied lands of Nabatea, so I agree to their proposal. The absurd situation in Arabia continues, with Euclid lost once again to attrition, having only returned a season previously. Fortunately, this gives Diogenes the opportunity to return to command his men, briefly. I wondered at this point that perhaps I was missing a technology out of the tactics branch to help us with all this supply system chaos, so I switched gears to tactical drills on the technology tree. We also learned that our lukewarm trade partner Carthage has made some technology advances of their own, having acquired their next-tier military reforms, and perhaps this will help them push back the Roman onslaught. Eualcidas moves up toward Armavir, and together the two generals batter the city garrison into submission, losing just upwards of 10% of our men in the assault. With Antiochos Soter having driven hard into the Bosphoron kingdom's expanse south of the Caucasus, the world has taken notice, our imperium now rising to level 6. With the capital of Armenia under our control, I make some more upgrades to the province, converting the barracks at Armavir to our own Tier 3 variant, and the cattle pens to farms at Arsamosata. Diogenes and Euclid start the hard trek back north from Eudaemon, the Saba pacified for the moment. To defend my lands of Nabatea and to receive the soldiers from Arabia, I raise another army at Petra under a young man Eugenios and his retinue of shield-bearers, adding to the army from the local Jewish levies. We have a similar supply problem now at Armenia, although not quite to the extreme that Diogenes and Euclid are suffering in Arabia. Antiochos heads back west to recover his army at Bithynia, while Eualcidas stands watch over our new possession at Armavir. The situation in Arabia continues to spiral out of control as another season passes and the supply crisis continues to drag on. The generals continue dragging their men back toward the sanctuary at Keraton. Fortunately, the much milder supply shortage at Armenia seems to have resolved itself as Antiochos Soter is now able to replenish his troops. The Daorsi have evidently finished off the RDI. With what's left of my surplus, I add a couple of white shields to Antigonos Doson, son of the Cyclops, the force only lacking a cavalry division now. Before I end the turn, I take a look around the map to assess the situation of our friends and enemies, and it's worth noting that Arche-Bosphorus have apparently made too many enemies, as they're attempting to prosecute a war in the east while trying and mostly failing to fend off our advances from the west and the incursions of the Saka from the north. Even our old friend Katpachika has gotten in on the action, evidently having abandoned their Arabian holdings to the Hagar, as they seek easier pickings on the far shore of the Black Sea. Suffering but not completely defenseless, Arche-Bosphorus finally make a show of resistance, making a punitive strike against our undefended territory in southern Mesopotamia at Charax. It looks as though I have no hope of winning this one, but I decide to give it a try, given our admittedly small garrison is at full strength while the enemy have several half-strength regiments among their attacking force. The Bosphorans are approaching in 3 groups from the west, while our small garrison huddles in the center of town. Unfortunately, I don't have any pikes to hold the avenues, but we have a couple of relatively strong hoplite regiments to anchor our defense, several archers to harass the enemy, quite a few unimpressive citizen militia spears holding the perimeter areas, and a couple of utterly worthless town mob hanging around waiting to die. I also have 2 archer ships that I deploy as close as possible to the southern end of the enemy advance, hoping they'll venture within bowshot. For the most part, the enemy column does the intelligent thing in avoiding the coastal approach, marching into the city along the undefended western avenues. The garrison ships pull back toward the harbor, and the 1st Regiment of Citizen Cavalry appear around the southern corner of the central plaza to attack our garrison captain's hoplite regiment. They inflict few casualties for their effort, generally getting on the wrong end of our spears. On the western side of the square, the majority of the enemy infantry assault force have conglomerated to break in that entrance to the capture point, and there the other regiment of hoplite struggle to hold back the tide of the Black Sea Greeks. The 2 regiments of citizen militia holding the rear of our defense begin circling around in what can loosely be termed a flanking maneuver. Although the sheer size of the enemy force guarantees they'll be able to adopt a second facing to fend off our spear attack, which probably won't be all that strong to begin with. My citizen militia on the opposite end of town finish off the Bosphoron cavalry, but then find themselves squaring off against a mix of Bosphoron medium spears and heavy pikemen in the harbor district. Figuring this is as good a time as any, I dispatch the town mob to flank the more isolated Bosphoron infantry on the eastern coastal side, first quickly breaking the medium spears there, but finding their pikes a bit tougher, as they've managed to almost beat back one of my citizen militia regiments. But soon they too fall to our massed mob of lesser Greeks. Behind them come another group of spears, this time of Roxolani origin, and they become the next target for our men. However, back in the center of town, things are going badly. The poor hoplite left to hold back the deluge of Bosphorans finally fold under the pressure, and the enemy swarm into the town square, rapidly wresting control of the capture point as my garrison archers backpedal and the garrison captain's own hoplite grit their teeth, plant their spears, and prepare for death. As predicted, the citizen militia on the northern avenue attempting the quote-unquote flanking approach have fallen quite quickly to the Bosphoran swordsmen, who had turned to face their advance, attempting to resist the fatalism that accompanies the realization that we simply cannot beat this many men. I do what I can with what I have left, sending the rest of my weak infantry around the flank of the first group of attackers, and unloading my archers from their ships to add their fire to that of the land missile infantry. Unfortunately, our hoplite and certainly our weaker garrison spears cannot really stand up to the Bosphoron-held swordsmen, even with our local missile superiority. We managed to inflict enough casualties to break another regiment of enemy spearmen, but there are just too many Bosphorons behind them waiting to take their place, and our garrison captain is quickly routed and slain. The archers fight on a bit longer, taking turns to block off the enemy pursuing them and sacrificing themselves in melee once their ammunition is running low. This tactic works reasonably well against their lightly armored skirmishers, but against their Thurio shield-equipped melee infantry our arrows do very little, and after a couple of minutes of scrambling around without too much to show for it, our archers finally realize they have nothing left to offer the defense of this town and run for their lives. We did actually manage to make it close, and we killed almost as many of them as we lost ourselves. However, with that, the Bosphorons have made their first reprisal count, taking another bite out of our shrinking province of Mesopotamia. Next turn, attrition and more attrition rule the events log. We do, however, get a random event for something called the Hidden Forge, rumors of an old blacksmith living in the depths of the forest with supreme weapon crafting skill. We can visit him personally, send a servant to make a purchase, or ignore the rumors altogether. This event comes with a base prosperity bonus of 10% to all income, so figuring this is more than just false rumors, I decide to have one of our nobles visit him personally. This could be a trap, but I feel that the likelihood is low. Antiochos Theos has reached the mountain pass south to Pella, recruiting another White Shield regiment, and Antigonos Doson heads west out of the city toward the western borderlands with the Daorsi. Euclid and Agirios have by now nearly dragged what's left of their armies to the southern border of Nabatea. And to the north, Eugenius' army adds a few more of the very heavily defensive Judean Thuriophoroi, who apparently combine both sword and spear in melee, a potentially powerful combination. Antiochos dedicates the new temple at Bithynia, and Eualcidas brings his army south toward the border of Archebosphorus' southern territories. During the intern phase, the Bosphoron army seemed to have left behind their recently captured settlement of Charax, but unfortunately we've no force with which to take it back. Our gamble with the Hidden Forge seems to have paid off, or it would have, if my income had not dropped so precipitously. Our new troops will get level 1 weapons for free for the next 3 turns. It's a shame I can't afford any at the moment. Finally, in a moment of personal glory, Agirios leads the Wisdom of the Goose into the promised land of troop replenishment at Karamutha, and the Golden Fleece isn't far behind. Antiochos Theos is finally ready to kill some more barbarians, and with the power vested in him by the co-regency and the patriarch deity Zeus, he declares another war. It's worth noting at this point that our trustworthiness has finally returned to the steadfast level after suffering from many diplomatic blunders over the past several years. Antiochos finds the minor Daorsi settlement of Epidamnos so poorly defended it just isn't worth our time, so he dispatches the garrison in an auto-resolve, claiming our first port on the Adriatic Sea, and he greedily eyes the larger and undoubtedly richer provincial capital of Dominium to the north. Eualcidas is fast on his feet, and brings the Spear of Ares to bear against the garrison of the minor settlement of Gazica in a swift riposte against the Bosphoran strike at Charax. The balance bar gives us little hope for victory, and my instinct was to pull back from the fight, but after pausing a moment to take a look at the actual army compositions, our numerous heavy hoplite, cavalry, artillery, and the incredible Syrian war elephants, I'm confident enough to give this one a try. We've seen this town arrangement before, the temple on the Acropolis and the capture point in the market square below. Based on my prior experience, which has mostly been on the receiving end of these assaults, I'm going to try to make my attack from the end of town opposite the Acropolis, north in this case, in order to capture the square first. Our cavalry are spread out in detachments of 3 regiments each on either wing, and the elephants are concentrated on the right. I initially started moving my spears forward with the intent to split them into 2 or more groups to attack separate avenues. It rapidly becomes apparent there's no need, as the threat of the Lethobolos has evidently brought out the enemy heavy citizen cavalry. Although they're probably feeling confident as they outclass my own lighter Longophori, they have a whole slew of hoplite to contend with. The enemy are issuing forth down the main 2 exits from the city, and as their first infantry reach the town perimeter, their cavalry come into range and suffer a hail of arrows before the panicked horses promptly impale themselves on the spears of our hoplites. Meanwhile, my own group of horsemen on the left have maneuvered around toward the eastern town entrance to approach the capture point, and the enemy infantry columns have begun to merge, the units trickling into the center of the gentle concavity made by my spear line, another volley of arrows arcing in to harass the garrison soldiers' advance. As one detachment of Loncophoroi set about capturing the town square, the other line up on the right-hand side of the Bosphoron infantry at the periphery of town, preparing to launch their mounts into melee when the moment is right. The concentrated flaming arrows and the Lithobolus shots are also having a detrimental effect on the enemy morale, and I expect that a decisive action could probably bring down their entire army. First, Eualcidas concentrates on pinning the enemy down frontally with his hoplite. There are so many of them that this proves somewhat difficult to do, so I decide eventually to send the elephants in and see what they can do, at first targeting the cluster of enemy missile troops huddling in the center of the semicircular melee. Temperance. I should have known better than to join a man calling his army the Spear of Ares. This is not a man of modest ambition or patience. He fights like a warrior, but he's a madman.
Yes, he fights with no helmet, as if that cloth diadem is going to protect him. But perhaps the gods are on his side. Look at us, we're about to take the city against all odds.
If we leave this battlefield alive and victorious, I will thank those great Syrian brutes, not Antiochos' golden boy.
Again, so much of what you say is quite sensible, and yet, please keep your voice down lest we should feel the temperance of the general's lash.
Eualcidas joins his men in the heated central engagement against the enemy general's analogous retinue of Bosphoron epilicatoi hoplite. My right-hand detachment of Loncophoroi, seeing the enemy spears attempting to overwhelm my infantry on the right, joined the fight, charging into the enemy flank and inflicting a pretty severe morale shock. However, as usual, it is the elephants who deliver the biggest morale shockwave, ripping apart the Bosphoron garrison archers in just a few seconds. And the effect of this is dramatic, breaking several units across the battle line. With a little more diligent fighting, my men managed to bring down what's left of the defending Bosphoron garrison, and with the elephants running around berserk, I'm quick to end the battle to avoid any untoward injuries to our own men. Under the circumstances, a fantastic result for us, particularly given the balance bar we faced at the outset. We even managed not to take too many friendly fire casualties and completely annihilated our foe. We've now put more than just a dent into Bosphoron territory, a big gash of Seleukid expansion that has now separated the northern and southern portions of their kingdom. To reduce the chance of Daorsi reprisal in Illyria, Eurydice sabotages the provisions of the larger army at Dominium, ostensibly reducing their movement. There's a river between their city and ours, but the distance is short, so I'm not sure this will be effective enough. The answer, arrived at in a short period of time, is that it's not. The Daorsi need very little in the way of supplies to strike out from their capital and across the river in a bid to liberate their recently taken settlement. Again, I'm evidently not the favorite in this battle, even though our army looks relatively strong with the elephants, the heavy cavalry, and the Lithobolos. It turns out, many of these are upper-tier Illyrian regiments composed of the local nobility and their most elite swordsmen, so we may have our work cut out for us after all. In this coastal unwalled settlement defense, the Daorsi are coming en masse from the north. There are only a couple of entrances to the town from that side, so we can very easily hold the central square without the fear of being flanked, unless the enemy move quite far to the south, either around the docks to the west or on the eastern edge of town. I set one regiment of White Shield pikemen in phalanx formation to defend the common entrance to the capture point from either of the northeastern approaches, while the other holds the main eastern approach, and the weaker phalangatae are placed at the second, more southern approach from the east. Most of the rest of my melee infantry will be set up to back up their Sarissa-armed comrades, and the Jewish slingers, having traveled so far from home, will try to hurl their stones overhead from the capture point. Antiochos and the cavalry and the elephants will move out of the east side of town to look for an opportune moment to smash the enemy in the open field. I've also got lots of deployable defenses to set up, and I use all of them, littering the town entrances with caltrops and spike traps, fire pits, stones, and wooden stakes, while I place barricades at the undefended parts of town to the south and west, hopefully giving myself a little bit of extra time to allocate defenders to these areas in an emergency. We're finally all set, and I immediately move Antiochos, his cavalry, and the elephants away from the town to the east, as the Daorsi rush toward the northern approach to town. There are so many spears among them it will be very hard to inflict a cavalry charge on any uncommitted attackers without suffering significant casualties. The elephants have a regiment of Atariatai Machairophori angling to attack them, and I pepper them with arrows before they get close enough to strike. I initially intended to pull back the elephants, but saw a couple fall to the ground and feared another volley of javelins, so in they go. Perhaps half of the attacking regiments are funneling into the northern avenue of town to face off against my pike phalanx, while a few more are maneuvering around the corner. The medium swordsmen fighting the elephants of course don't fare too well, and I'm fortunate that the remaining nearby 2 regiments of spearmen instead decide to pursue Antiochos rather than assisting their brethren against the elephants. Though heavily armored, our citizen cavalry deftly outmaneuver the pursuing heavy spearmen, and in the commotion the enemy have crashed against our defending phalanx, the fireballs remaining unlit in the chaos. The elephants head off in search of more Illyrians to crush, and one unit encounters the Illyrian light skirmishers outside the northeastern town periphery. The other moves off west to close in on the enemy rear, and I start moving the rest of my men who were previously committed to defending the southern areas of town around the edge in a flanking maneuver. The Illyrian skirmishers in the west are quickly overrun, just as the other regiment of elephants begin dismembering another regiment of Illyrian skirmishers at the edge of the enemy rear, in the northern approach to the town. Antiochos still has not been able to assist in any meaningful way, as he's been chased around by 2 spear regiments, but as one of them breaks away to counter our elephants mauling the rear of their attack column, the young king turns his cavalry on the remaining Illyrian noble spearmen, surrounding and decimating the men with no regard for their noble Illyrian heritage whatsoever. They're tough opponents, at first refusing to break under the extreme duress, but after unleashing his war shout, Antiochos soon sends the spearmen fleeing. Before plunging in for the final push against the main part of the enemy strength, who will be completely surrounded at their point of attack, I first set about cleaning up the edge of town, setting the elephants on the other lone regiment of Illyrian nobles, and my second unit of white shields begin forming up to begin their slow but deadly march into the enemy flank at the northeastern edge of town. The other white shields are a bit battered, having lost about a third of their men, but they're still holding their line remarkably well. The press of the elite Seleukid pikes into their flank is enough to break a few of the lesser Illyrian regiments in the center, but most fight on, even though several of the regiments intermittently waver. Eventually, however, as I am able to get my elephants under control and redirect their ferocity into the chaos of the central melee, the enemy morale is quickly and collectively lost completely. Both regiments of Indian war elephants run rampant through the retreating Illyrians, churning the blood and dirt of the street into a congealing mess. After giving my units a few more minutes to ride down the remaining routing enemies, I finally end the battle, the Thunderbolts of Zeus weakened but more or less intact after facing what I hope is the best that the Daorsi have to offer. Not many Daorsi lived, but those few who survived flee back to their capital. Just when I'm basking in the victory, the Saba take the opportunity to go right back to war with us in Arabia. There's not much I can do about this, but it's quite disheartening to contemplate another excursion into the desert sands after all of the trouble we went to for the Himyar settlement. Reluctantly, the Golden Fleece head back south into Arabia, although hopefully the supply shortage will have been averted before long. Now the Seleukid Empire is at its greatest extent ever, reaching from the Red Sea to the Adriatic, with Antiochos Theos having pushed all the way into Illyria. Conflicts with the great powers of the West are seemingly inevitable, just as a war tears apart the eastern Seleukid domains and the southern colonies of Arche-Bosphorus. And the strife in Arabia goes on without end, the Himyar defeated but the Hagar and the Saba retaining the bulk of the peninsula under their control.